My husband's secretary moved into our guest room to help with paperwork, then demanded I serve her breakfast in bed. My husband laughed. She outranks you now. I smiled, served the meal and waited. The moment I heard Grant's keys jingling at the front door that Friday evening, I knew something had shifted. Not because of any dramatic premonition, but because of the way he cleared his throat 3 times before even crossing the threshold. His nervous tell that I'd learned to recognize after 12 years of marriage. Aaron. His voice carried that particular tone he used when he'd already made a decision and was preparing to present it as inevitable. We need to talk. Before we continue, I want to thank you for joining me in sharing these stories that matter. If you believe that quiet strength and behind-the-scenes competence deserve recognition, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more women who need to hear this. Now let's see how this breakfast tray becomes the most powerful weapon of all. I was folding laundry on the living room couch, matching his work shirts with the methodical precision that had become second nature. The same routine we'd fallen into since we both started at Meridian Foods. Him as a floor manager overseeing production schedules, me handling the endless stream of customer orders and returns at the front desk. We weren't the power couple we'd once imagined ourselves becoming, but we were steady, reliable. Or so I'd believed. Lisa needs a place to stay, he announced, settling into his recliner without looking directly at me. Her lease is up and the commute from her current place is killing her. She's been staying late almost every night this week and I can see how exhausted she is. The admiration in his voice when he said her name made my hands pause mid-fold. His secretary for the past 8 months. 26 years old, auburn hair always perfectly styled, and possessing that effortless confidence that made everyone in the office gravitate toward her desk. She's incredibly organized, Grant continued, his enthusiasm building. Yesterday she restructured my entire filing system without being asked. Found 3 supplier contracts that were about to expire. Saved us from potential delays. The woman's sharp as a tack. I resumed folding, keeping my expression neutral. Where exactly would she stay? The guest room. He said it casually as if we were discussing dinner plans. Just temporarily until she finds something closer to work. Maybe a month, 2 at most. The guest room. The space that still held my mother's handmade quilts, the cedar chest she'd given us as a wedding gift, and the collection of family photographs spanning 3 generations. It wasn't just a room, it was sacred territory filled with memories and heirlooms that connected me to something larger than our increasingly routine existence. Don't you think we should have discussed this first? I kept my voice measured, but something cold was beginning to form in my chest. Grant finally met my eyes and I saw a flicker of irritation cross his features. It's not permanent, Aaron. The woman needs help and we have the space. I thought you'd be more understanding. Understanding. The word hung between us like an accusation. In Grant's world, being understanding meant agreeing without question, supporting his decisions even when they directly affected my life and home. That weekend, as I watched Lisa move her belongings into our guest room, I tried to convince myself this was temporary. She arrived Saturday morning with 3 suitcases, a laptop bag, and an apologetic smile that seemed genuine enough. I really appreciate this, Aaron, she said, standing in the doorway of what had been my private sanctuary. Grant told me you were okay with it, but I wanted to thank you personally. Of course, I replied, though the words felt foreign in my mouth. Make yourself comfortable. She immediately began rearranging furniture, moving my mother's rocking chair to make room for a small desk she'd brought. Watching her transform the space with casual efficiency, I felt something fundamental shifting beneath my feet. Sunday evening, as I prepared dinner, I asked Grant if Lisa would be joining us. The question seemed innocent enough. We'd always been the type of couple who included house guests in our meals. His laughter caught me off guard. Not a gentle chuckle but a sharp, almost mocking sound. Maybe ask her nicely, he said, not looking up from his phone. She's kind of above your pay grade now. The words hit me like a physical blow. Above my pay grade. As if I were some entry-level employee seeking audience with corporate royalty. The casual cruelty of it, the way he elevated her while diminishing me in my own home, created a wound I hadn't expected. I stood there holding a wooden spoon, marinara sauce dripping onto the kitchen floor, processing the reality that my husband had just ranked me beneath his secretary in the hierarchy of our own household. Excuse me. I managed. Grant glanced up, apparently surprised by my tone. What? I just meant she's got a lot of responsibility at work. Important projects. She might be too busy for family dinner. But we both knew that wasn't what he'd meant. The damage was done and something inside me crystallized into cold determination. That night, lying in bed beside Grant as he scrolled through work emails, I made a decision. If Lisa was going to be treated like royalty in my home, then I would serve her accordingly. But service, I was beginning to understand, could take many forms. The next morning I woke before dawn and began preparing the most beautiful breakfast I could create. Scrambled eggs with fresh chives from our garden, perfectly golden buttered toast, sliced strawberries arranged in a delicate fan, and coffee brewed in our French press. I arranged everything on my grandmother's best china. The set with tiny blue flowers that had survived the Depression and 3 generations of careful handling. Standing outside the guest room door with the tray, I took a steadying breath. This was where it would begin, though I couldn't yet see where it would end. I knocked gently. Lisa? I've brought you breakfast. She opened the door wearing silk pajamas that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget, her hair somehow perfect despite having just woken up. Her eyes widened as she took in the elaborate tray. Oh wow, you didn't have to. Time to start your day, I interrupted with a smile that felt strange on my face. Grant says you outrank me now, so I'll serve accordingly. For a moment she looked genuinely surprised, perhaps even uncomfortable. But then something shifted in her expression. A recognition of power dynamics, of having gained ground in some unspoken territory war. She smirked, and in that expression, I saw everything I needed to know about who Lisa really was beneath the professional charm and apologetic gratitude. That's very thoughtful, she said, accepting the tray with newfound confidence. I do have a big day ahead. As she closed the door, I remained in the hallway for several long moments, my grandmother's tray now in the hands of a stranger who'd invaded my sanctuary and accepted my husband's casual dismissal of my worth with obvious satisfaction. But as I walked back to the kitchen, something else was growing alongside the hurt and anger. A plan was forming, though I couldn't yet articulate its shape. I only knew that breakfast was just the beginning, and Lisa had no idea what kind of service she was really going to receive. Grant found me washing dishes, humming softly to myself. That was nice of you, he said, pouring his own coffee into a regular mug. See? I told you she'd fit right in. I smiled and continued washing, my movements steady and purposeful. Oh yes, I agreed. I have a feeling this arrangement is going to work out perfectly. He kissed my cheek and headed off to shower, completely missing the edge in my voice. But then Grant had been missing a lot of things lately. The breakfast tray sat empty outside Lisa's door an hour later, every crumb consumed. Tomorrow I decided I would serve her again. And the day after that. Each meal prepared with the same meticulous care, the same gracious presentation. After all, important people deserved special treatment. And I was going to make absolutely certain Lisa felt very, very special indeed. Tuesday morning arrived with the kind of clarity that only comes after crossing a line you never thought you'd cross. As I stood in my kitchen at 5:30 a.m., grinding fresh coffee beans and whisking eggs to perfect fluffiness, my movements carried a new sense of purpose. The herbal laxative tablets sat innocuously in my medicine cabinet, remnants from a brief diet phase 2 years ago when I'd convinced myself that internal cleansing would somehow fix the growing distance between Grant and me. Now, as I crushed half a tablet into powder with the back of a spoon, I told myself this was just evening the playing field. Lisa had disrupted the balance of my home, my marriage, my sense of self-worth. A little digestive discomfort seemed like appropriate compensation. The powder dissolved completely into the scrambled eggs, invisible and tasteless. I plated everything with the same meticulous care as the day before. Fresh berries arranged in a perfect spiral, toast cut diagonally, coffee served in the delicate cup that matched the china pattern. Standing outside her door, tray balanced perfectly, I felt a strange mixture of guilt and anticipation. This wasn't me. I'd never been vindictive, never been the type to seek revenge through subterfuge. But then again, I'd never had someone move into my sacred space and openly smirk at my husband's casual dismissal of my value. "Good morning, Lisa," I called softly, knocking with my free hand. She opened the door wearing a silk robe that probably cost more than my monthly car payment, her phone pressed to her ear. "Hold on," she said into the device, then looked at me with mild irritation. "Oh. Breakfast again. I thought you might need your strength today, I said, maintaining my pleasant smile. Grant mentioned you have that important client presentation. Her expression softened slightly at the mention of work. Right. Yes, that's today. She took the tray without really looking at it, already turning back toward her phone conversation. Thanks, Erin. The dismissal stung, but I'd expected it. As I walked back downstairs, I heard her resume her conversation. Sorry about that. Just the housekeeper bringing breakfast. Housekeeper. The word followed me into the kitchen where I began preparing Grant's much simpler meal. Toast and coffee in our everyday dishes. When he appeared 20 minutes later, tie askew and rushing as usual, I handed him his travel mug without comment. You're quiet this morning, he observed, pecking my cheek absently. Just thinking about the day ahead. I smoothed his tie, a gesture so automatic it required no conscious thought. Drive carefully. An hour later, Lisa emerged from the guest room looking slightly pale but perfectly put together in a navy business suit that highlighted her figure. She'd eaten every bite of breakfast, I noticed as I collected the empty tray. Feeling all right? I asked with genuine-sounding concern. Fine, she replied curtly, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. Though I might be coming down with something. My stomach feels a bit unsettled. Oh no, I murmured sympathetically. There's been something going around the office. Would you like me to make you some ginger tea for later? She waved me off, already heading toward the door. I'll be fine. Important day today. But by 10 a.m. my phone was ringing. Erin. Grant's voice carried a note of frustrated confusion. Lisa called in sick. Says she's having stomach issues. Can you cover her desk for a few hours? Just answer phones and reschedule a couple of appointments. Of course, I replied, already reaching for my car keys. I hope she feels better soon. Walking into the office and settling behind Lisa's desk felt surreal. Her workspace was immaculate, color-coded files, expensive pens arranged in perfect lines, a small succulent plant that probably cost more than most people spent on groceries. Everything designed to project competence and sophistication. The phone rang constantly. Clients needing quotes, suppliers confirming deliveries, employees with scheduling questions. I handled each call with the same efficiency I brought to my own work, taking detailed notes and following up promptly. By lunch, I'd rescheduled 3 meetings, resolved a billing dispute, and organized Lisa's chaotic email inbox. You're a lifesaver, said Jennifer from accounting, stopping by around noon. Lisa's system for tracking invoices has been driving me crazy for weeks. This actually makes sense. Other colleagues began gravitating toward the desk, asking questions they'd apparently been storing up. I answered what I could, made notes about what needed Lisa's attention, and gradually began to understand just how many small fires had been smoldering while she focused on more glamorous projects. Honestly, Erin, whispered Tom from shipping during a brief lull, you should be the one sitting here permanently. You actually know how the company works. The compliment warmed me in a way I hadn't experienced in years. At my usual station I was invisible, reliable but unremarkable. Here behind Lisa's desk, people actually saw me as competent, valuable, necessary. When I arrived home that evening, I found Lisa curled on the living room couch, still in her business suit but looking decidedly worse for wear. Her perfectly styled hair was disheveled, and her usual confident posture had crumpled into something more vulnerable. How are you feeling? I asked, settling into the chair across from her. Terrible, she admitted, pressing a hand to her stomach. This came out of nowhere. I've never had stomach problems before. Sometimes stress can manifest physically, I offered gently. New living situation, demanding job, all that responsibility Grant's been giving you. She looked at me sharply as if trying to determine whether there was hidden meaning in my words. Grant says you covered for me today. Just answered phones and rescheduled a few things. Nothing too complicated. He seemed pleased. Her tone carried a note of irritation that she tried to disguise as gratitude. Thank you. That night, preparing Wednesday's breakfast, I added another half tablet to her eggs. Not out of malice, I told myself, but out of curiosity. How long would it take for the pattern to become clear? How would Grant react when his perfect secretary proved unreliable? By Thursday, Lisa had missed 2 full days of work. Grant was growing visibly frustrated, making frequent trips to her room to check on her condition and offer various remedies. I watched these interactions with fascination, noting how quickly his admiration transformed into annoyance when inconvenienced. "She needs to see a doctor," he announced Thursday evening, pacing the kitchen while I prepared dinner. "This is affecting important projects." "Poor thing," I murmured, stirring the pasta sauce. "Maybe it's something she picked up before moving in. These things can take time to work through your system." Friday morning, Lisa appeared in the kitchen looking genuinely miserable. Her usual polished appearance had given way to sweatpants and an oversized shirt, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail that made her look younger and more fragile. "I think I need to see a doctor," she said, accepting the breakfast tray with shaking hands. "This can't be normal." "Probably wise," I agreed. "Though sometimes these digestive issues resolve on their own once the underlying stress is addressed." She gave me another sharp look, but I was already turning away to tend to the coffee maker. As she carried her tray upstairs, I noticed she moved more slowly, her usual confident stride replaced by careful, measured steps. Standing at the kitchen window, watching Grant's frustrated gestures as he talked on his phone in the driveway, probably explaining Lisa's continued absence to increasingly impatient colleagues, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Control. For the first time since Lisa had smirked at me in the guest room doorway, I was the one shaping events rather than simply enduring them. The breakfast tray, innocent and beautiful as ever, had become my weapon of choice. And the best part was that no one suspected the quiet, reliable wife in the kitchen of anything more subversive than excessive hospitality. Tomorrow I decided I would bring Lisa breakfast in bed again. After all, she needed her strength. The following Monday I arrived at the office to find chaos brewing behind the carefully maintained corporate facade. Lisa had returned to work after her extended sick leave, but the accumulated damage from her absences was becoming impossible to ignore. "Where's the Morrison Industries file?" I heard Jim from procurement asking anyone within earshot. Lisa was supposed to have it ready for the quarterly review. I glanced toward Lisa's desk where she sat looking pale and overwhelmed, frantically shuffling through papers with shaking hands. The confident woman who'd smirked at me just 2 weeks ago had been replaced by someone fragile and desperate, jumping at every phone ring and email notification. "I put it somewhere safe," she was saying into her headset, voice strained. I'll find it and call you back." But I knew she wouldn't find it because I'd seen her filing system during my days covering her desk. Important documents mixed with coffee shop receipts, client contracts buried under promotional materials for office supplies. Her organization was all surface-level aesthetics with no functional foundation. By Tuesday, the cracks had widened into full breaks. Lisa sent the Harrison Company's confidential pricing structure to their direct competitor by mistake, mixing up email addresses in her distracted state. The phone call from our sales director echoed across the entire floor. "How does something like this happen?" Michael's voice carried through the thin office walls. "This is basic professional competence we're talking about." I watched Grant's face flush red as he took the call in his office, Lisa standing beside his desk with tears threatening to spill. Through the glass partition I could see him gesturing frantically, his mouth moving in what were clearly apologies and damage control promises. When the call ended, Grant's voice rose loud enough for half the office to hear. "Lisa, this can't happen again. I've been covering for you, but this is beyond what I can fix." She burst from his office, brushing past my desk without acknowledgement, her perfect composure finally cracking completely. I continued typing my reports, documenting every detail of the supply chain inefficiencies I'd been observing for months. That evening, their confrontation in our driveway was impossible to ignore. I stood at the kitchen window, ostensibly washing dishes while watching Grant pace back and forth, his arms waving in frustrated gestures. "I put my reputation on the line for you," his voice carried clearly through the evening air. "Do you understand what kind of position this puts me in?" Lisa's response was too quiet to hear, but her body language spoke volumes. Shoulders hunched, head down, the posture of someone who knew they were drowning. 20 minutes later, Grant stormed into the house, his face a mask of barely controlled anger. "She's under a lot of stress," he announced to no one in particular, heading straight for the refrigerator and pulling out a beer. "I'm sure she is," I replied mildly, not looking up from the dishes. "You don't understand the pressure she's under. New living situation, demanding job, everyone watching her every move." The irony wasn't lost on me. Everyone watching her every move, except the person who should have been paying the closest attention to her actual work quality. The next morning, I knocked on Lisa's door with her breakfast tray, noting how long it took for her to answer. When she finally appeared, her eyes were red-rimmed and puffy. "I'm not very hungry," she said, but accepted the tray anyway. "You need to keep your strength up," I replied gently. "Especially during difficult times." She looked at me sharply as if searching for hidden meaning in my words. "People at work think I'm incompetent." "I'm sure that's not true," I said, though we both knew it was. "Sometimes when we're not feeling well, everything seems harder than it should be." That afternoon, while Lisa was at another doctor's appointment trying to determine the cause of her persistent stomach issues, I submitted my workflow efficiency proposal to our department supervisor. 3 pages of detailed suggestions born from 12 years of watching processes break down and inefficiencies compound. The proposal outlined simple solutions for common problems: automated backup systems for critical files, standardized email protocols for client communications, and a streamlined approval process that would prevent important documents from getting lost in bureaucratic shuffle. I didn't mention Lisa by name, didn't point fingers or assign blame. I simply presented solutions to problems that had been festering for months, problems that anyone paying attention would have noticed and addressed. Friday brought the Morrison Industries disaster. Our biggest client, responsible for 30% of our quarterly revenue, called to inform us that their expected shipment had never arrived. The delivery trucks were sitting at the wrong warehouse, 2 states away, because someone had failed to confirm the updated shipping address. I watched Grant's face cycle through confusion, realization, and horror as he traced the error back to Lisa's desk. The confirmation email sat unread in her inbox, flagged as important but buried under dozens of less critical messages. "This is a $250,000 mistake," I heard him tell our regional manager over the phone. "Yes, sir, I understand. It won't happen again." When he hung up, Grant sat in his office for a long moment, staring at his computer screen with the expression of a man watching his career prospects evaporate in real time. Lisa tried to explain, her voice carrying across the office in desperate, broken sentences. "I've been so sick I must have missed it somehow. The email system has been acting strange. Maybe someone deleted it by mistake." But there was no one to blame except herself, and everyone knew it. The sympathetic glances from coworkers had transformed into eye rolls and whispered conversations by the water cooler. That evening, Grant brought Lisa flowers, a pathetic bouquet of grocery store roses that seemed to mock the gravity of the situation. I watched through the kitchen window as he handed them over in the driveway, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "I'm sorry I yelled yesterday," I heard him say. "This isn't your fault. You're dealing with health issues." But the apology rang hollow even from my position 50 feet away. The flowers were less about genuine remorse and more about his own guilt over hiring someone based on attraction rather than qualifications. When he came inside, I was sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop, working on a follow-up memo to my efficiency proposal. "She's going through a difficult time," Grant said, settling heavily into the chair across from me. I looked up from my screen and really studied his face. The stress lines that had deepened over the past 2 weeks, the way his eyes avoided mine, the defensive set of his jaw. "You're right," I said quietly. "I'm not a manager. I don't have to make the hard decisions or take responsibility when things go wrong. I just keep things running smoothly, day after day, year after year." The words hung in the air between us, loaded with implications he wasn't quite ready to acknowledge. Grant opened his mouth as if to respond, then seemed to think better of it. Later that night, as I prepared Lisa's breakfast for Monday morning, I reflected on how quickly facades could crumble when the foundation beneath them proved faulty. Lisa's charm and polish had been enough to secure her position, but couldn't sustain her performance when subjected to real pressure. I measured the herbal supplement with scientific precision, no longer pretending this was anything other than deliberate strategy. The breakfast tray had become my instrument of revelation, exposing truths that had been hidden beneath surface appearances. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities for Lisa to demonstrate exactly who she was when stripped of Grant's protection and her own carefully constructed image. And I would be there, reliable as always, documenting every failure with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had finally found her purpose. Tuesday morning arrived with the kind of electric tension that precedes either triumph or disaster. Hartwell Industries was scheduled for their annual facility tour at 10 a.m. The account that represented our largest contract renewal, worth more than any other client relationship in our company's history. I arrived at the office 15 minutes early as was my habit, and immediately sensed something was wrong. Grant was pacing near Lisa's desk, his usually perfect hair disheveled and his tie crooked in a way that signaled barely controlled panic. "Where are the presentation folders?" he was asking Lisa, who sat staring at her computer screen with the blank expression of someone watching their world collapse in real time. "I thought they were in the conference room," she replied weakly, her voice barely above a whisper. "What conference room? I asked you to prepare everything last week. The welcome packets, the facility maps, the safety briefing materials. Where are they?" Lisa's face had gone ashen. I put it on my calendar, but then I was so sick last week and I thought maybe Jennifer from marketing was handling the materials." Grant's jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. "Jennifer handles promotional materials, not client presentations. This was your responsibility." From my desk 20 feet away, I could see the complete breakdown of their carefully maintained professional relationship. Grant was no longer the protective mentor and Lisa was no longer the competent protege. They were just two people facing a career-ending disaster with no solutions in sight. "They'll be here in 45 minutes, Grant said, his voice dropping to a deadly calm that was somehow more terrifying than shouting. "What exactly am I supposed to tell them?" I glanced at the clock. 9:15 a.m. In my desk drawer, I had a complete backup file system I'd maintained for years. Copies of all major client documents, updated facility maps, emergency contact lists, and presentation templates that could be customized within minutes. It was the kind of redundant organization that came from 12 years of watching important things fall through bureaucratic cracks. Rising from my desk, I approached their crisis with the calm demeanor of someone who had been preparing for this moment without realizing it. "Grant," I said quietly, "I might be able to help." Both of them turned toward me with expressions of desperate hope. "I have backup copies of the standard presentation materials in my files," I continued. "If you give me 20 minutes and access to the conference room, I can have everything ready." "You have backup copies?" Lisa asked, her voice tinged with confusion and something that might have been betrayal. "I keep copies of important client documents," I explained simply, "in case of emergencies." What I didn't say was that I'd been maintaining this shadow filing system precisely because I'd observed how frequently things went missing, how often critical information disappeared into the chaos of other people's organizational failures. Grant looked at me as if seeing me clearly for the first time in years. "Can you really pull this together?" "Give me 15 minutes, I said, already heading toward the supply room. "I'll need someone to run copies while I set up the conference room." The next 20 minutes transformed me into someone I didn't know I could be. I moved through the office with purposeful efficiency, delegating tasks to colleagues who seemed surprised but willing to help. Jennifer brought promotional folders from marketing. Tom from shipping provided updated safety protocols. Sarah from accounting pulled the latest financial summaries. As I arranged materials in the conference room, I felt something awakening inside me. A competence and confidence that had been dormant for so long I'd forgotten it existed. This wasn't just about saving Grant's presentation. It was about proving to myself that I was capable of more than quiet endurance. "These look professional," Jennifer commented, helping me arrange the welcome packets. "Did you design these layouts?" "Just modified the existing templates," I replied, though I'd actually improved them significantly, adding visual elements and reorganizing information for better flow. At 9:58 a.m. I stood in the conference room doorway watching Grant review the materials one final time. Everything was perfect. Better than perfect, actually. The presentation was more polished and comprehensive than anything Lisa had ever produced. "Aaron," Grant said, looking up from the folders with an expression I couldn't quite read. This is excellent work." "I'm glad I could help," I replied, then stepped aside as our visitors arrived. The Hartwell Industries team consisted of 3 executives, CEO Margaret Hartwell herself, along with her operations director and chief financial officer. I positioned myself at the back of the room, officially just there to assist with logistics but actually observing every interaction. Grant presented beautifully, his natural charisma enhanced by having solid materials to work with. The facility tour went smoothly with every question answered and every concern addressed. I found myself anticipating needs before they arose, offering additional documentation, providing clarification on technical details, ensuring the coffee stayed fresh and the presentation materials remained organized. "This is impressive," Margaret Hartwell said as we concluded the tour in the conference room. "Your facility management and safety protocols have clearly improved since our last visit." "We've been working hard to streamline our processes," Grant replied, though his eyes found mine across the room. Margaret's attention followed his gaze. "And who coordinated today's presentation?" The materials were exceptionally well organized. There was a moment of silence that stretched longer than it should have. Grant glanced toward Lisa's empty desk. She disappeared sometime during the tour, claiming another bout of stomach distress. "That would be Erin," Grant said finally. "She handles our client documentation systems." Margaret walked over to where I stood near the presentation displays. "These are your materials?" "I compiled them from various departments," I said modestly. "It's important that our clients have comprehensive information." "You've done excellent work," she said, then turned to address Grant. "She's clearly very capable. Why isn't she in a more prominent client-facing role?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Grant's mouth opened but no words emerged. Behind Margaret, her colleagues were nodding in agreement, clearly impressed by the organization and attention to detail they'd experienced. "Erin prefers to work behind the scenes," Grant finally managed. Margaret looked at me with raised eyebrows. "Is that true?" I felt the weight of the moment, the opportunity to either maintain my invisible status or step into something larger. "I enjoy making sure things run smoothly," I said carefully. "Whether that's behind the scenes or more directly with clients." "Well," Margaret said with a smile, "if you ever decide you want to expand your role, you should consider client relations. You have exactly the kind of competence and attention to detail we value in our vendor partnerships." After the clients left, the office buzzed with energy from the successful meeting. Colleagues who had barely noticed me for years stopped by my desk to offer congratulations and ask questions about the presentation materials. "That was incredible," Sarah from accounting said. "I had no idea you were keeping track of all that information." "Someone has to," I replied with a smile that felt more genuine than any expression I'd worn in months. Grant approached my desk as the office began to empty for lunch, his expression complex and unreadable. "Thank you," he said simply. "You're welcome," I replied, not looking up from my computer. "I mean it, Erin. You saved my career today." Now I did look up, meeting his eyes directly. "I saved the account. Your career is your own responsibility." The drive home was silent, Grant's hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had gone white. I stared out the passenger window, watching familiar scenery pass by while processing the morning's revelations about my own capabilities. We were no longer the same people who had driven to work that morning. The balance of our relationship, professional and personal, had shifted in ways neither of us was quite ready to acknowledge. But sitting in our quiet car, I knew that Margaret Hartwell's question would echo in both our minds. Why wasn't I in a more prominent role? And more importantly, what was I going to do about it? The silence in our house Wednesday evening was different from the comfortable quiet of a couple settled into routine. This was the brittle silence of things breaking apart, of foundations crumbling beneath carefully maintained facades. Grant sat at the kitchen table, staring at his phone with an expression I'd never seen before, equal parts anger, confusion, and something that looked suspiciously like fear. Lisa hadn't shown up for work, hadn't called, hadn't responded to his increasingly frantic texts. "Maybe she's really sick," I offered, setting a cup of coffee beside his elbow. "That stomach bug has been persistent." He looked up at me with hollow eyes. "She's not sick, Erin. She's falling apart." The admission hung between us, raw and honest in a way that felt almost foreign coming from him. For weeks he'd defended Lisa's every failure, made excuses for her mounting incompetence, blamed external factors for her professional disasters. Now, confronted with her complete absence, he seemed to be processing the reality he'd been avoiding. Thursday brought a call from HR that changed everything. I was updating inventory records when my desk phone rang. "Mrs. Patterson? This is Diana Morrison from Human Resources. Could you come to my office when you have a moment?" I'd like to discuss some workplace concerns that have been brought to our attention. The walk to HR felt surreal. In 12 years at Meridian Foods, I'd never been called to human resources for anything more serious than updating my emergency contact information. Diana Morrison was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who had a reputation for handling delicate situations with surgical precision. "Please sit down," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her immaculate desk. "I want to discuss some allegations that have been made regarding workplace dynamics in your department." My heart rate accelerated, but I kept my expression calm. "What kind of allegations?" "Lisa Reynolds has filed a formal complaint claiming workplace harassment and sabotage. She believes coworkers have been deliberately undermining her work, hiding files, and creating a hostile environment that's affecting her health and performance." I nodded slowly, processing this information. "That sounds concerning. She's also mentioned that she's been staying at your home, which creates some additional complexities regarding the workplace relationships involved." Diana's eyes were kind but penetrating. "I need to understand the full scope of the situation." For the next hour, I answered questions with the same careful honesty I'd brought to every aspect of this situation. Yes, Lisa had been staying in our guest room. No, I hadn't observed any deliberate sabotage of her work. Yes, I had occasionally covered her responsibilities during her absences. No, I had never done anything to intentionally harm her professional standing. Several employees have mentioned that you stepped in to handle the Hartwell Industries presentation when Lisa was unable to perform her duties, Diana noted, consulting her file. "Can you tell me about that?" "Grant was concerned about the client meeting," I said simply. "I had backup documentation that could help, so I offered to assist." "And you had this documentation because?" "I maintain backup files for important client relationships. I've seen too many things get lost or overlooked over the years." Diana made a note, then looked at me directly. "Multiple colleagues have described you as exceptionally reliable and competent. Some have suggested that you might be better suited for more advanced responsibilities than your current position." The comment caught me off guard. "I'm satisfied with my current role." "Are you?" she asked gently. "Because from what I'm hearing, you've been functioning well above your official job description for quite some time." That afternoon the whispers started. Not malicious gossip, but the kind of focused conversation that happens when long-simmering workplace tensions finally reach a breaking point. I overheard fragments as I moved through the office. "Always knew something was off about that situation. Grant's been making excuses for her for months. His wife is the one who actually knows how things work around here." By Friday, the investigation had expanded beyond Lisa's complaints. Other employees had apparently been documenting issues for months. Missed deadlines Lisa had blamed on system errors, important communications that had gone unanswered, the growing workload other staff members had absorbed to compensate for her failures. "This is bigger than we initially realized," Diana told me during a follow-up conversation. "We're looking at patterns of favoritism, boundary violations, and performance issues that go well beyond a single employee's complaints." Grant received his formal warning Monday morning. I wasn't privy to the details, but his face when he returned from the meeting told the story clearly enough. The confident manager who had casually dismissed my worth just weeks ago now looked like a man who understood that his professional reputation hung by an increasingly thin thread. Lisa's absence stretched into a second week. Her formal diagnosis of emotional burnout and workplace stress came with a doctor's note recommending extended leave. But everyone understood that this was less about recovery and more about face-saving, a graceful exit from a situation that had become untenable. The transfer came through on Tuesday. Lisa would be moving to a position in the accounting department, handling data entry and filing. Officially, it was described as a lateral move to better accommodate her health needs. Unofficially, everyone recognized it as a demotion that removed her from any client-facing responsibilities. Suddenly, people were approaching my desk with questions they'd never asked before. "Erin, do you know where the Henderson contract templates are? Could you show me how you organize these client files? Would you be interested in joining the Process Improvement Committee?" The recognition felt strange after years of invisible competence. Margaret Hartwell's question, "Why wasn't I in a more prominent role?" seemed to have planted seeds in minds throughout the office. I found myself training new hires, consulting on workflow efficiency, and being included in meetings where my input was not just welcomed but actively sought. At home, the packing process became a drawn-out ordeal that stretched across multiple weekends. Lisa would disappear for hours, then return to move a single box or rearrange items she'd already sorted. The guest room took on the chaotic appearance of someone who couldn't decide between leaving and staying, between admitting defeat and maintaining the pretense that this was all temporary. Grant moved through these days like a man processing the collapse of some cherished illusion. He'd built an entire fantasy around Lisa, the brilliant secretary who would transform his department, the sophisticated woman who appreciated his managerial vision, the professional partner who validated his importance. Watching that fantasy crumble left him quiet and withdrawn. "I didn't expect all this to happen," he said one evening, finding me in the laundry room where I was folding clothes with the same methodical precision I'd maintained throughout this entire ordeal. I looked at him, really looked, taking in the stress lines that had deepened around his eyes, the way his shoulders sagged with the weight of consequences he'd never anticipated. "Neither did I," I replied, continuing to fold. "Especially not the part where my breakfast tray made more of a difference than anything you ever said." The words emerged with quiet satisfaction mixed with genuine sadness. I'd been proven right, but the victory felt hollow when measured against what our marriage had become. We were two people who had shared 12 years and a mortgage, now staring at each other across a chasm that neither of us knew how to bridge. Grant opened his mouth as if to respond, then seemed to think better of it. He turned and walked away, leaving me alone with the laundry and the strange new reality we were all still learning to navigate. Outside, I could hear Lisa loading another box into her car, the sound marking another small step toward the end of the most bizarre chapter our quiet suburban life had ever contained. But somehow I suspected the most significant changes were still ahead of us. Saturday evening brought an unexpected quiet to our house. For the first time in weeks, no sounds echoed from the guest room. No pacing, no phone conversations, no muffled crying through thin walls. Lisa had finally finished her prolonged departure, loading the last box into her sedan while Grant stood helplessly in the driveway, watching 12 years of his marriage and 3 weeks of his fantasy disappear simultaneously. I had observed this final exodus from the kitchen window while preparing what I knew would be my last dinner in this house. The transfer paperwork sat completed on my laptop, submitted Friday afternoon during my lunch break while Grant attended another damage control meeting with upper management. The regional office position had materialized like an answer to prayers I hadn't known I was praying. Diana Morrison from HR had mentioned it almost casually during our final interview. "There's an opening for a client relations coordinator in our Denver branch. The pay increase would be substantial, and they specifically requested someone with your organizational background and problem-solving skills." I'd applied immediately, called in recommendations from colleagues who had witnessed my competence during the Lisa crisis, and received confirmation within 48 hours. Sometimes when you finally demonstrate your worth, opportunities appear that had been invisible before. That night, Grant and I moved around each other like strangers sharing temporary space. He attempted normal conversation over dinner, questions about my day, comments about the weather, but the words felt hollow, like actors performing a play whose plot they'd forgotten. "It's quiet without her here," he said finally, pushing food around his plate without eating. "Yes," I agreed. "It is." He looked at me expectantly, as if waiting for me to fill the silence with reassurance or analysis or some indication of how we should proceed. But I had no words left for managing his emotions or smoothing over uncomfortable realities. Sunday morning arrived with the crisp clarity of early autumn. I woke before dawn, not from anxiety or insomnia but from a sense of purpose that felt both foreign and completely natural. Today would be different from every morning that had preceded it. I prepared breakfast with the same methodical care I'd brought to Lisa's trays, but this time the presentation told a different story. Plain white toast, dry and unbuttered. Black coffee in a plain ceramic mug. No fruit, no garnish, no delicate china that connected this meal to generations of women who had served their families with love and care. The tray itself was the same one that had carried dozens of elaborate breakfasts to the guest room. The sterling silver serving piece my grandmother had received as a wedding gift, polished and maintained through decades of family gatherings and special occasions. But today it carried something unprecedented, an envelope that would reshape the trajectory of 2 lives. I climbed the stairs slowly, savoring the weight of the moment. Grant was awake, sitting up in bed and scrolling through his phone with the distracted energy of someone avoiding difficult thoughts. "Breakfast," I announced quietly, setting the tray across his lap with the same gentle precision I'd used for Lisa. His eyes widened as he took in the austere presentation. "This is different. I thought you might prefer something simpler," I replied, settling into the chair beside our bed. The same chair where I'd sat during countless conversations about Lisa's needs, Lisa's potential, Lisa's importance to his professional success. Grant lifted the envelope with fingers that weren't quite steady. "What's this about?" "Read it," I said simply. I watched his face as he processed the transfer letter, the acceptance of a position 3 states away, the formal notification that I would be starting my new role in 2 weeks. His expression cycled through confusion, disbelief, and finally a panic that seemed to surprise him with its intensity. "Aaron, you can't be serious about this." His voice carried the same tone he'd used when trying to convince upper management that Lisa's failures weren't indicative of deeper problems. "We can work this out. Lisa's gone now. Things can go back to normal." The word, normal, hung between us like an accusation. Normal. As if the past month had been an aberration rather than a revelation of truths that had been festering for years. "You told me she outranked me," I said gently, my voice carrying none of the anger that had once burned so hotly. "But she's gone now. And so am I." Grant set the letter aside and reached for my hand, but I'd already moved beyond the reach of gestures that might once have swayed me. "This is about more than Lisa. You know that, right? This is about us, about our marriage, about the life we've built together." I looked at him, really looked, and saw not the man I'd fallen in love with 16 years ago, but someone who had become a stranger through a series of small betrayals and casual dismissals that had accumulated like interest on a debt he'd never acknowledged. "Yes," I agreed. "It is about us. It's about the fact that you invited another woman into our home without consulting me. It's about the way you elevated her opinion above mine, defended her incompetence while dismissing my capabilities. It's about 12 years of being taken for granted while someone else received credit for work I'd been doing all along." "But that's over now," he said desperately. "I see that I made mistakes. I can do better." The conversation that followed felt surreal. Grant arguing for a marriage he'd been systematically undermining, pleading for a second chance with someone he'd consistently undervalued. I listened with the detached compassion of someone watching a stranger's crisis, offering the same patient attention I'd given to his problems throughout our marriage, but without the emotional investment that had once made his concerns my own. "I've already signed the lease on an apartment in Denver," I said when he finally ran out of arguments. "The moving truck comes Thursday." Over the following week, I packed 12 years of shared life with the same methodical efficiency I brought to everything else. Grant oscillated between angry accusations and desperate bargaining, sometimes within the same conversation. He couldn't understand how I'd planned this so quietly, so thoroughly without his knowledge. But that was the point he'd never grasped. I'd been handling important details without his knowledge for years. The only difference now was that I was handling my own life instead of his. The transfer to Denver exceeded every expectation. My new office overlooked the mountains, and my colleagues treated me with the respect that comes from being specifically recruited for your competence rather than being inherited as someone else's spouse. Client relations work suited me perfectly, combining organizational skills with problem-solving and interpersonal dynamics that actually mattered. Grant called frequently during the first month, his tone shifting from anger to negotiation to genuine bewilderment. "I don't understand how we got here," he said during one late-night conversation. "Everything was fine before Lisa came along." "No," I corrected gently. "Everything was convenient for you before Lisa came along. There's a difference." The divorce proceedings were remarkably civil. 12 years of marriage dissolved through paperwork and equitable distribution, mediated by lawyers who seemed almost disappointed by the lack of drama. Grant kept the house and most of the furniture. I kept my grandmother's china and the silver serving tray that had started everything. Now 6 months later, I make breakfast for myself on quiet Sunday mornings in my bright apartment kitchen. Sometimes I use the silver tray, placing my own perfectly prepared meal on the surface that once carried so much manipulation disguised as service. Each time I see my reflection in that polished surface, I smile. Because I finally learned the most important lesson of my adult life. The difference between serving someone and serving yourself is often just a matter of choosing the right tray. And sometimes the smallest acts of apparent subservience can become the foundation for the greatest acts of liberation. The secretary moved out after 3 weeks of disrupting our marriage. I moved on after 12 years of maintaining it. And in the end we both got exactly what we deserved. If this story of quiet revenge had you completely hooked, smash that like button right now. My favorite part was when Aaron served that final breakfast tray with the transfer letter, turning 12 years of service into pure empowerment. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more incredible revenge stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.